Welcome back to Orientation to Clinical Research. For this video, we're going to talk about matching your proposal to funding sources, aka getting yourself funded, or what's sometimes called grantsmanship. The first piece of advice I have if you are applying for funding is to read the call. This may be called a NOFO or an RFP or a CFP. In general, we call it the call. It is the piece of information, sometimes a PDF, sometimes a website, where all of the information associated with the funding is listed. You want to read through every piece of information they provide. The call will tell you why the funder is interested in this particular project. That gives you an idea of how to pitch yourself towards them because you understand where they're coming from. It may also give you suggested or even required approaches or topics. Depending on the funder, sometimes it's here are some ideas, but it's not limited. And other times it's you must propose to do the following. So understanding what they think is appropriate or necessary will be important for filling out your plan. It will also tell you formatting requirements. This is highly important. Funders will reject your proposal unread if you do not follow the formatting requirements. Sometimes it's fairly general, other times it is extremely specific. Make sure you have read and understand what formatting you need to be using. The call will also tell you what they expect the budget and the timeline to be. They won't always tell you a maximum amount for the budget, but they will give you an idea of how much they're planning to spend and how many proposals they're planning to fund, which will give you an idea. They'll also tell you if they're expecting a 1 year or a 3 year or a 5 year program, and that helps you define your own timeline. It also will tell you the deadlines, and the deadlines, again, are very strict. You need to be aware of the deadline. If it's up to you to submit the proposal, I recommend submitting ahead of the deadline. If it's not up to you, just be aware of your internal deadlines to make sure that the proposal gets submitted at the time that is required. My second piece of advice for filling out a grant proposal is to follow the instructions. Again, the formatting seems minor, but is not. They will use this as an excuse to reject your proposal. Make sure you follow the page limits, the margins, the font. They will also often tell you the structure and what elements should be included, and you can follow those exactly. It helps give structure to your proposal, and it ensures you that you are filling out exactly what they expect. Their instructions will also give you a lot of information on what can and can't be in the budget, and what their expected deliverables or timeline might be. If you are applying to a federal granting agency, you will want a ScienceCV account. ScienceCV is short for Science and Engineering Curriculum Vitae, and it is a website that is run by the NIH and links to your MyNCBI account. If you don't have one of those, you should get it. It will create your BioSketch and your current and pending support for NSF, for NIH, and now for USDA. This is really important because now for NSF and for NIH and soon for USDA as well, you will be required to use ScienceCV to create your CV. Create a ScienceCV account early in your career if at all possible. MyNCBI is fairly good at finding your publications to populate your BioSketch, but if you say, like me, have a very common name, or if you work in a field that is not PubMed indexed 100% of the time, it can take a bit of time to make sure that all of your publications are in. Each BioSketch that you create in ScienceCV can be specifically created for a particular call or for a particular topic, and NSF and NIH have different formatting requirements. USDA is only just now switching to ScienceCV, so I'm waiting to see what their requirements will be within that system. This is a very helpful system because once you've created one BioSketch, all of your others can be based on that one. And so it will save you time in the long run, but it is a little tedious to set up. So I recommend doing that now. It will also help when somebody asks you for a CV that you will be able to just download one rather than having to create a new one from scratch for every person who asks. Now, when we talk about submitting a grant proposal, most institutions consider that grants are being made to them and not to you. The institution is the one who signs the proposal on your behalf. In fact, the institution signs everything on your behalf that you do for your work. So, if you are submitting a grant, you are not submitting it generally directly to the funder, you are submitting it through your institution. That means that the internal deadlines are very important. You need to know what the internal deadlines is and what has to be finished by then versus what can be edited until the actual submission deadline. For instance, at my institution, we have to have everything except the project narrative finished by the time of submission to the internal deadline. But the project narrative, meaning the actual science portion of the proposal, can be edited up until submission, and they will ask at the time of submission if we want to make any edits to that document. If you are submitting as a sub-award, you will still have to go through your institutional system for approval before you can send your materials to the primary institution on the proposal. If you have sub-awards on your proposal, they will have to do the same on their end. That means that for sub-awards, they need to be prepared ahead of time because they have to have their pieces through their institution's process prior to submission to the main institution. What that generally means in practice is that the budget and statement of work need to be arranged ahead of time, usually about 2 weeks before the actual submission deadline. If it's a tight turnaround and you have sub-awards, get that budget in as soon as possible. The statement of work, by the way, is a document that states what a sub-award would be doing as part of that grant proposal. This statement of work is a useful thing for each of the institutions involved to be able to point to say, this is what we are doing for the money that we are getting. Once you have submitted to your institutional deadline, there may be questions. So you want to be available to answer those questions up until the submission point. Even if you have no edits to be made, you want to be available just in case they come back with, you have to make a change on the budget, or we have a question about the way this document was formatted, or hey, we noticed you're missing something. All of that you want to be available for. So if you are submitting as the primary investigator and you have clinical duties, make sure that they know how to reach you even when you're in the clinics. My next piece of advice for writing a grant proposal is to talk to people. People will be so helpful to you in preparing your grant proposal. First, the administrative experts within your department or your college will be your best friends when it comes to formatting and creating a budget and getting all of the paperwork together. And sometimes they may even be able to make recommendations based on the funder if they are familiar. Particularly in colleges of medicine, they should be well familiar with NIH and with their recommendations. In colleges of veterinary medicine, they will have lots of experience putting together USDA proposals. They'll be able to give you some guidelines. You can talk to your program officers. The program officers are the people in charge of the call for proposals at the funding agency's end. Unless it says otherwise, and there are some institutions like CDC for which this is always the case, the program officer's contact information is listed because they are there to talk to you. The recommendation generally is when you want to apply to a program, you will find the program officer and you will send them a one-page summary of your plan. And for most proposals like NIH and NSF, there is a one-page summary, a specific aims page or project summary that is formatted in a certain way. You'd send that to your program officer and request a meeting to discuss. The program officers will most likely get back to you to schedule a meeting, and they can talk to you about the program goals and your specific aims and how those align. Sometimes the program officers aren't allowed to talk to you, in which case they will send you to the FAQ or to the webinar recording or to the schedule for the webinar. in which all of your questions can be answered. They'll let you know that. Sometimes the program officer will respond by email, and while they will never directly say not to submit, I have them very gently tell me that what I am proposing is not within the scope of the program. They don't say it directly, so learn to read carefully when a program officer writes back to you with suggestions but without requesting a meeting. Alongside the administrative experts and the program officers, your colleagues and mentors can be incredibly helpful when you're preparing your proposal. They can provide you with guidance. Frequently, they will have examples of proposals or pieces of proposals that can serve as guides as you're developing your own. They may also be helpful for editing or for reading, especially as you're working for your first few proposals, to give you feedback and guidance on how your writing is aligning with what's expected with the program. If you can find a colleague who has been funded through the same program, this is ideal because they will be able to tell you what their experience has been. When we're talking about NIH proposals, there are a number of components involved. So I'm just going to break those down for you so you understand what is involved in writing an NIH proposal. I mentioned already the specific aims page. This is a one-page abstract where you lay out your goals, your outcomes, and the impact that you expect. Then you will have the research strategy. This is usually 12 to 15 pages. Check the instructions for that call to make sure that you've got it right. And it can be organized by aim, or it can be organized as one cohesive unit. In the research strategy, you will want to include preliminary data. So preliminary data is evidence your approach will work, usually within your own research lab. There are calls for proposals that will say preliminary data is not required. Don't believe them. They want to see some preliminary data, even if it's minimal. They just mean that technically you don't have to include it. Now, you can include preliminary data in each of these specific aims, or you can have it at the top of the proposal. Significance is absolutely required. This is where you explain what impact your proposal will have on clinical medicine. Innovation is where you say how this is different from other research that has already been published. And then approach is the main part of the proposal. There are usually 3 aims, and usually it covers what you plan to do in as much detail as you can fit within the page limits. Again, you can separate these out so that you have 3 different sections, each with preliminary data, significance, and innovation. But most commonly, you will have significance and innovation, a preliminary data section, and then 3 specific aims in your approach section. You will possibly have letters of support. These are not required, but they can document the commitment of the team and the contractors to your program. NIH has recently adopted the NSF style of letters of support, whereas rather than letters of collaboration, they are following a very strict structure and the wording is pre-specified. So check what the current requirements are. You will have a facilities and other resources document. This explains what equipment and space you have available for the work that you plan to do. I recommend reaching out to a colleague to get an example of this while you write your first one. And once you have one, you can pretty much reuse it for everything, just updating as necessary. You will need resource sharing plans. This includes your data management plan, which if you watched the video on data management, you already have a good idea of what's going to be in there, explaining the format and the sharing process for your data. But if you're also producing other resources such as cell lines or mice or new equipment, you need to have a plan for how you will share or otherwise distribute those resources. Along with your budget, you will need a budget justification, which will lay out what you are asking for and why and how those numbers were arrived at. Again, reach out to colleagues and ask for copies of their budget justification to see how it's normally formatted. You will need bio-sketches for yourself and for any senior personnel or co-investigators. Again, use ScienceCV, it will make your life easier. You'll need a project summary or abstract and a project narrative. These are short lay summaries that are used for public reporting, and you can read other people's on the NIH Reporter website. You will have a separate references section. So good news, in your research strategy, the references do not count against the page limit. And then optionally, you could have a cover letter and an assignment request. NIH proposals are reviewed by study sections. Some study sections may have better expertise on the panel for some problems. Others may have people for whom your particular project may raise questions that you don't want to deal with, particularly if you're aware of animosity within your community. Cover letters and PHS assignment requests are where you can specify that you think it would be best if sent to a particular study section, or if there are reviewers that are on that study section that you would have to request not review your proposal for any reason. NSF proposals have a slightly different structure. USDA also slightly different structure. Unfortunately, there's no unified structure. And of course, foundations and other non-federal funders have their own structures. Work with your grants people to understand what's needed and read the call for proposals to understand what they're asking for. And good luck with your proposal writing.